Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
Welcome to our deep dive into the strategic world of game theory. Today, we'll be using game theory in practice, understanding strategic decision-making through real-life examples, to unpack how game theory plays out in economics and in politics, and even in social behavior. So by the end of this deep dive, you'll have a grasp of key game theory concepts and how they kind of pop up in your everyday life.
It's really about how do individuals, businesses, or even entire nations make decisions when the choices of others affect the outcome. So it's not just about winning or losing, it's about anticipating actions and strategizing in a way to reach your goals.
Okay, so let's start with the basics here. What exactly is game theory?
Well, game theory provides a mathematical framework to analyze these strategic interactions. We're really diving into scenarios where you have multiple players who are making choices that impact one another, and the goal is to try to predict outcomes.
Okay. And a key assumption here is that players are rational. What does that mean in this context?
So rationality in game theory means that each player is aiming to maximize their own benefit, which can sometimes lead to some counterintuitive outcomes, but it's about understanding the motivations that drive each decision.
So where can we see this play out in the real world? What are some classic examples that illustrate these principles?
Well, a prime example would be the prisoner's dilemma. And this dilemma highlights how choosing what seems best for you individually can sometimes lead to a worse outcome for everyone involved.
Could you walk us through a classic prisoner's dilemma scenario?
Sure. So imagine two suspects who have been arrested for a crime. They're held in separate cells, unable to communicate. They're each offered a deal: confess and implicate the other suspect, or stay silent. If both suspects stay silent, they may get off with a lighter sentence due to a lack of evidence. But if one confesses while the other stays silent, the confessor goes free, and the silent one receives a heavy sentence.
So the incentive to betray the other person is really strong, even if it might hurt both suspects in the long run.
Exactly. And so the paradox is that acting rationally from a self-interested perspective, that is by confessing, leads to a worse outcome for both of them than if they had cooperated and stayed silent.
And this feels very applicable to much bigger issues than just two suspects. How does this dilemma manifest in global challenges like climate change?
Well, imagine each country as a player in this game. They can choose to reduce emissions, which comes at an economic cost, or they can keep polluting, hoping that other countries will make the cuts for them. If everyone cooperates, we all benefit from a healthier planet. But the temptation exists to free ride. That is, to benefit from the efforts of others without actually bearing the cost yourself.
And if all the countries take that approach, then nobody takes the necessary action, and we end up with a worse climate for everyone.
Yeah, that's the prisoner's dilemma playing out on a global scale. And you see this tension between individual gain and collective well-being at the heart of a lot of complex issues.
Are there examples of this in the business world?
Sure. So take competing companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi. They could cooperate maintaining stable prices, which ensure reasonable profits for both, but they're constantly tempted to undercut each other.
Yeah, lower prices to grab market share, it seems like a good strategy in the short term.
If both companies engage in this price war, they end up with lower profits. It's the same logic as the prisoners confessing. Short-term gains lead to a worse overall outcome.
So even in cutthroat business, cooperation can actually be the most rational approach.
Often, yes. But the fear of being exploited by the other player defecting can make it difficult. So trust and reputation become very, very crucial, especially over repeated interactions.
We'll explore those factors more later. Let's shift to another key game theory concept, the stag hunt. How does this differ from the prisoner's dilemma?
So while the prisoner's dilemma highlights this conflict between self-interest and collective well-being, the stag hunt explores cooperation in situations where trust and risk are much more central.
So what's the hunt all about?
Okay, so picture two hunters. They can cooperate to hunt a stag, which provides a very substantial meal. However, each hunter can also choose to individually hunt a hare.
Okay, so there's a smaller guaranteed reward versus a potential for a much larger reward if they work together.
Precisely. So the stag represents the higher payoff from cooperation, and the hare the smaller but certain individual reward. If both cooperate, they get the stag. But if one defects to hunt the hare while the other goes for the stag hunter gets nothing.
I see the dilemma. It's not just about the payoff. It's about the risk and the trust between the hunters.
If they trust each other, they go for the stag. If there's a lack of trust, they're more likely to settle for the hare, even if it means missing out on a much bigger reward.
This seems very relevant to something like international trade agreements.
Indeed. Countries can cooperate to lower trade barriers, which can lead to mutual benefits, the stag. But there's always this fear that one country will renege on the deal and implement protectionist policies. That's the hare. And that can lead to suboptimal outcomes for everyone involved.
So it's about balancing the potential benefits against the risk of the other party defecting.
And that's where international institutions and repeated interactions become important, because they can foster that trust and make cooperation more likely.
Let's discuss the concept of Nash equilibrium. This seems pretty crucial to understanding how these games play out.
So, a Nash equilibrium describes a scenario where no player can improve their outcome by unilaterally changing their strategy. Given the strategies of all the other players, everyone's essentially making the best choice based on what everyone else is doing.
So it's a point of stability in a way.
Precisely. It doesn't necessarily mean that the outcome is ideal for everyone, but it means that no one can do better by individually changing their approach.
What's a real-world example of Nash equilibrium in action?
Well, a classic illustration would be the Cuban Missile Crisis. Both the United States and the Soviet Union recognized that escalating the conflict further would lead to mutually assured destruction. Neither side could improve their position without risking catastrophe, and this resulted in a stalemate, a form of Nash equilibrium.
So the fear of total annihilation led to stability, however terrifying that might be.
Yeah, that's a pretty dramatic example of how, even in those high-stakes situations, game theory can help us understand the strategic calculations behind a particular outcome.
And it's clear how game theory can be applied to this vast range of situations, from international conflicts to even our everyday choices.
It really is all around us. Even something as ordinary as choosing your route during rush hour traffic can be analyzed through this lens.
Really? How so? I feel like I'm always trying to outsmart traffic.
Well, if everyone chooses what they perceive as the fastest route, it quickly becomes congested, which makes other routes more appealing. Eventually, drivers distribute themselves across different routes so no one can unilaterally reduce their travel time by switching.
So we reach an equilibrium where everyone is stuck, but nobody can do better by changing their routes.
Exactly. It's frustrating but stable. A Nash equilibrium in everyday life.
Are there scenarios where game theory predicts clear winners and losers, where one person's gain directly causes another's loss?
Absolutely. That's where the concept of zero-sum games comes in.
Zero-sum games. What are those?
So in zero-sum games, one player's gain is exactly balanced by the other player's losses. The total payoff always adds up to zero.
So it's pure competition. Win-lose with no possibility of mutual benefit.
Yeah, you can think of a tennis match. One player's victory necessitates the other player's defeat.
What about outside of sports?
Well, elections are another example.
Okay.
So in a two-candidate race, a vote for one is a vote lost for the other. The total votes remain constant. And so the candidates are vying for a bigger share of that fixed total.
So it becomes a battle for every single vote with no room for compromise.
Yeah. In a simplified two-party election, yes. You're right. Real-world elections are often more complex with multiple candidates and voter overlap, but the idea of one person's gain being another's loss often applies.
It seems like understanding game theory could give you an edge in these situations.
It does offer valuable insights into the strategic calculations. By anticipating your opponent's moves and understanding the dynamics at play, you can make more informed decisions to increase your chances of success.
We've discussed competition quite a bit, but what about cooperation? Can we move beyond the prisoner's dilemma towards more collaborative outcomes?
That's where the study of the evolution of cooperation comes in, and it examines how cooperative behavior can emerge and stabilize even among self-interested individuals.
So even if personal gain is the primary motivator, there's still hope for collaboration.
Absolutely. So repeated interactions, reputation, potential future rewards can all contribute to fostering cooperation.
Are there any real-world examples of how cooperation has evolved successfully?
Well, Scandinavian societies are often cited as a good example. They have a high level of trust in their institutions and in each other. And this results in high tax compliance and low corruption.
Because people are more willing to contribute to the system because they believe it's fair and effective.
Right. And that creates a strong social safety net and a very high quality of life for most citizens. So it's kind of a positive feedback loop of cooperation.
Are there other examples, perhaps on a smaller scale, that demonstrate this?
Sure. Think about farmers who share irrigation systems. They must cooperate to ensure equitable water distribution or risk depleting the shared resource. And so over time, they develop norms and methods to manage that system fairly. driven by the need for long-term sustainability.
So even when there's potential for conflict over limited resources, cooperation can emerge as the best strategy.
Exactly. It really highlights how repeated interactions and this understanding that everyone benefits from a healthy system can override those short-term selfish impulses.
It's encouraging to see cooperation trumping self-interest in such diverse settings. But we've focused a lot on this rational decision-making. What about the role of emotions in psychology?
Well, that's where behavioral game theory comes in. It integrates psychological insights into decision-making, acknowledging that humans aren't always perfectly rational.
So we're adding a layer of human complexity to the equation.
Emotions like fairness, trust, even spite, they can all affect decisions, sometimes leading to outcomes that traditional game theory wouldn't predict.
Can you give us an example of how behavioral game theory explains some of these seemingly irrational choices?
Sure. So consider the ultimatum game. One person proposes how to split a sum of money, and the other person can either accept or reject the offer. If they reject it, neither gets anything.
So logically, any offer should be accepted even if it's unfair.
Right. However, people often reject offers that they perceive as unfair, even if it means personally losing money.
So they're prioritizing fairness over pure financial gain.
It really demonstrates that human behavior is driven by more than just these calculations of profit and loss. Our sense of fairness, our emotions, social norms, they all play a role in how we make decisions.
And this adds a fascinating layer of complexity to game theory, going beyond just the numbers and logic, and understanding the human element.
Yeah, and behavioral game theory really aims to bridge that gap, creating models that incorporate both the rationality of traditional game theory and the nuances of human psychology.
And these models are invaluable in understanding everything, from market behavior to political negotiations to even our daily interactions.
Absolutely. Understanding the basic principles of game theory and how human behavior influences them allows us to navigate complex situations more effectively and make more informed decisions in all aspects of life.
This has been a really insightful exploration of game theory. We've covered a lot, from the prisoner's dilemma to the Stag Hunt to Nash Equilibrium to the evolution of cooperation.
And we've really just scratched the surface here. Game theory provides this vast and compelling framework for understanding how we make decisions in a world where our choices are so intertwined.
It's been a real eye-opener.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.